I've been thinking this week as I've kind of watched my own behavior. It's easy for me sometimes to think pretty highly of myself because some of the big sins that I see in the lives of other people aren't true of my own life. But I'm well aware of the fact that Jesus had a lot to say about the fact that that doesn't necessarily mean that my life is without its sin. Maybe there's some things in my life that need to be addressed and need to be readjusted, brought into conformity with what God would have for me. It's easy for me to think of, these big sins in the lives of other people that have expensive consequences. It cost a lot to themselves or to their family members or to their friends. But some of the sins in my life aren't really that big. They seem kind of small in terms of the cost, but it doesn't mean that they're unimportant. It doesn't mean that I shouldn't be concerned about those things. I think when Jesus laid out what we commonly refer to as the golden rule, he was hitting on one of those kind of things, that it's real easy for me in my life to treat someone else in a way that's different than how I really want to be treated. And when we think of Matthew 7:12, and we think of Jesus' words there, that we're in everything to do to others what we would have them do to us, there's just something that seems right about that for us, isn't there? There's just something that seems right. Hey, I'll have a medium coffee. Great. Cool. Thanks. There's an old story told about a farmer and a baker. The baker was starting to think that maybe the farmer was cheating him just a little bit on the butter that he was selling to him on a regular basis. So several times when he bought the butter, he would measure it carefully, and he found out that a pound of butter wasn't really a full pound. He kind of got fed up with that, and he finally had the farmer arrested for fraud. At the trial, the judge asked the farmer if he had some scales with which to weigh his butter. He said, well, of course. And the judge said, and I presume you have weights? And the farmer said, no, I don't have any weights. And the judge kind of looked at him odd and said, well, how is it that you know how much a pound of butter would be to sell? And the farmer said, well, it's kind of like this. He said, when the baker started buying butter from me, he said, I decided I'd start buying my bread from him. He said, so I started using his 1 pound loaves as the weights on my scale. He said, if he's being shorted, it's his own fault. We kind of chuckle about that, but the reality is there's a certain rightness about a golden rule like that. A certain rightness to us, a sense of justice about the fact that we ought to treat people like we would want to be treated. Jesus was pressing something beyond that. He was saying something more. And that's what I've been thinking a lot about lately. Thanks. I think it's important when we think about that to recognize what it was that Jesus was really saying and what it was that Jesus wasn't saying. I think in some ways, Jesus wasn't saying that it was an excuse to rationalize our chance to get revenge against somebody. It's not that Jesus was saying, you should do to others as they have done to you. It's not a justification for vengefulness or vindictiveness. That person did something really mean to me, so I can do something really mean to get back at them. That's not at all what Jesus was saying. Nor do I think that Jesus was saying that it was an excuse to kind of keep score or to turn the screws on somebody to get something out of them. We live in a culture of reciprocity. I do something for you and I keep score. I expect you to do something back for me. And if I do 2 good things for you, then, I'm going to call that in at some point. It tends to be the way things work in politics, in business, sometimes even the personal lives of others. But that's not at all what Jesus was saying when he said that you should, in everything, do for others what you would have them do for you. You see, it's initiatory in nature. It's a tool, it's a guide for me to know how I ought to treat somebody. It's a way for me to think about my behavior beforehand, to think about how I'm going to treat somebody before the fact, not a way to get back at them or not a way to get something from them. It's just the way that I ought to treat them because I have the heart of Jesus. And that's really the heart of all of this. It strikes me that Jesus even said that this was inclusive in scope. It wasn't only for certain situations. It was, he says here, in everything. Everything that I do. Jesus didn't say that I should do unto others as I would have them do to me in circumstances where that's easy to do, or where that's comfortable, or where that's convenient. Jesus said that I was to do unto others as I would have them do unto me in everything, even in those circumstances where it's difficult. Even when they've been mean to me, I ought to treat them in a manner that is kind, as I would have them treat me, not necessarily the way they perhaps did to me. That's a tough calling. That's a big challenge, but it's one that I can't ignore. It's not a small thing. It's a big one. And I've got to figure out why and how that ought to play out in my own life.